This happened to me and my girlfriend when we were traveling across country. We had to stay in various motels because although she was okay with sleeping in our car, I was never really able to do that. She could just fall asleep with her head on the window at the drop of a hat, but I would be up all night trying my best to get down. We didn't make any reservations or anything like that. We just kinda drove until we got tired and began looking for any motel with a vacancy. Maybe on our third night of our trip, we had a pretty creepy experience with the motel that we found. I could tell right away driving into it that I was not going to like this place very much. We were in a pretty rural area, and this place looked really run down. Still though, I was really exhausted and needed to at least get some sleep. We decided to bite the bullet and spend the night there. We got into our room and began to prepare to get some sleep. Suddenly, the phone began to ring. Figuring that it was just the office calling for some reason, I picked it up and answered. "Your wife's pretty cute," the voice on the other end told me. "I can't wait until I'm sleeping in bed with her." I wanted to say something back, but whoever was on the other end hung up immediately. My girlfriend asked me what happened, and I told her about that strange experience. Maybe I shouldn't have, because it really frightened her. I thought though that if we received another call, she should at least be prepared to know. Not that I was expecting anyone to call back. About 10 minutes later though, the phone rang once again. I decided to answer it, thinking it was likely the same caller from before, and I was right. "Time's running out for you. Soon I'll be there." Then he immediately hung up. We were freaked out by that point, needless to say. Gathering our stuff up, we decided to go check with the office. We told them about the calls, but it was obvious they were not coming from the staff there. I considered it for a moment, because they were really the only ones who should have even known we were in that room, but the voice wasn't even close to sounding like either of them. We asked if they had any idea what was going on, and they were just as confused as we were. We asked if we could change rooms. We figured that maybe someone just knew the number to that particular room and was giving us a hard time or trying to scare us. He put us in another room on the other side of the motel. We went to that room, and at this point we were very tired. I knew it wouldn't take very long for me to get to sleep. However, I didn't even get the chance to. We had only been in the room for a few minutes before the phone began to ring again. My girlfriend and I both immediately got tense. I decided to answer. "You know, changing rooms won't help you hide," the voice on the other side of the phone said. Then, like all the previous times, the phone hung up right away. My girlfriend knew immediately what had just happened. We talked about what we were going to do. I was exhausted, but now we were both on edge. We had no idea if this was just a prank or if someone was actually going to try and do something to us. We also knew at this point there was no way we'd be able to get any sleep. Someone obviously knew the phone numbers to the rooms and was also actually watching us. That's the only way they could have known we'd switched rooms. We decided to just check out and get back on the road. We would find another motel. We gathered our things again and left the room. We both felt very conspicuous walking out of that room. We felt eyes on us, that whoever had called us was now watching us. We decided to put our stuff in the car before going in and telling the clerk we were just going to check out. When we got out to the car though, we were stunned to see that all 4 of our tires had been slashed. We got even more scared. Immediately we went to the clerk and asked him to call the police. We could have brushed off the phone calls as being a prank, even with the switching of rooms, but the tires being cut, that made it so much more real. It really made us believe that someone had been watching us and was intent on hurting us that night. Unfortunately, the police couldn't do very much. There were a lot of guests in that motel, and they couldn't wake every single person up and question them all. The most they could do was poke around a bit and make a report. Our car was taken to a mechanic, and we rode along with the police to get there. It was a really long time before everything was taken care of, and it was an even longer time before I was able to get a good night's sleep. This happened to me when I was 13 years old, but I still remember it as clearly as if it just happened today. I had some uncles who were pretty close to me in terms of age. A lot of times in the summer, if I went over to my grandma's house, we would go for rides in the back of a pickup truck. I especially loved doing this at night because it was a very, very creepy ambiance. Back in those days, I was looking for anything that could creep me out to entertain me. This was a bit of an impromptu visit mid-summer. It was really hot outside as I remember, back in the days when we had glass bottles of soda and not plastic ones. I recall this mostly because we were well stocked on bottles of Mountain Dew. My two uncles decided that night that they wanted to go for a drive through the hills. My brother and my cousin were with us, and they wanted to do it too. We loaded up in the pickup truck at nighttime together. My uncles and my older brother were in the cab. My cousin and I were in the bed of the truck. I enjoyed those rides a whole lot. I recall they were always a bit scary. There were no lights on those country roads, so when it got dark, it got real dark. The only light we had was from the headlights of the truck, and being in the bed of it, that didn't do us back there a whole lot of good. My cousin and I were having a lot of fun though. We liked being scared, and we liked scaring each other too. On some level, the two of us were expecting the older boys to try and do something to scare us as well. We kept waiting for the possible jump scare, but that was more in the back of our mind. I really wish I could describe to you what it was like to be riding in the bed of the car like we were in the dark. It's the sort of thing you really miss when you're grown up. Everywhere we go, there are lights everywhere. It's hard to get scared like you used to be. The darkness was so encompassing that night, it felt like we were nearly isolated. Another thing I can think of is that it felt like we were driving through a tunnel, only made of trees and some such. My cousin and I were back there doing our thing, talking about things we thought might scare each other. These were old dirt roads, so my uncle was not driving the truck particularly fast. There were tons of twists and turns, especially the higher up you got into the hills. The truck slowed down a bit as it was about to go around a turn. We weren't going very fast to begin with, but the turn was extremely steep. We grabbed the sides of the truck to brace ourselves as we made the turn. I was very familiar with this area. My uncles had tried to scare us one time by telling us many cars had had accidents right on that turn. In fact, they said some people had recently died going around the bend. I was absolutely sure it was their way of trying to scare us by making us think we'd all die by going off the road. My back was facing the inside, with my hands bracing me on both sides. That was when it happened. I felt something touch my left wrist. I turned and looked at my arm, and was stunned to see what looked like, for a brief moment, a human hand attempting to grab my arm. I pulled my arm away as we passed by. As I mentioned, it was only for a brief moment. I easily snatched my arm back, and then the truck was already around the corner. I quickly moved to the opposite area, where my cousin was sitting. I was confused, but I explained to him what just happened. I don't think he really believed me at first. He knocked on the window and told my uncles to stop. They did this, and we explained to them what just happened as well. We took our flashlights and walked back over to that sharp turn. My uncle took a rifle as well. When we went back, we were unable to find anyone or anything. There was definitely no one anywhere near us. My uncle turned it into an opportunity to scare us a little by suggesting it was the hand of someone who had died while making the turn. Of course, my cousin and I believed him right away. We got back in the truck and took off again. Riding in the bed of that truck was extremely terrifying. My cousin and I wanted to be in the cab, but there wouldn't be room for us. Whatever I had seen, and the stories my uncles told us, combined scared the crap out of us. We were all too eager to get home. I have no idea what that was that night, but it was the scariest moment in my life. Right on the outside of town, there's an old railroad track. At this time, I had lived in this town for about 10 years. I could count on my hands how many times I'd actually seen a train moving on it. However, right after a bridge, there was another off-track. I'm not really sure what you'd call it. There were often train cars parked there for a really long period of time. The area around there was very heavily wooded. There was a road that went through it and up a hill as well. There were a few houses up there, but very spread apart. I would often take that road because it was a shortcut to get back home, and it led to a field as well. That's how I knew about the train cars that were often parked there. I was walking with a friend one day when he decided he wanted to take some pictures of those train cars. He was designing some sort of game, I believe, and felt he needed pictures to model off of. After taking pictures of some of the back cars, he wanted to walk to the ones in front as well. We had been snapping photos for a good 15 minutes at that point. As we started walking forward, though, we noticed something. Someone snuck out from between two of the cars and then started to walk in our direction. I can't explain why, but seeing this guy made us both feel very uncomfortable right away. There were rarely any people back in that area. I asked my friend if maybe we should just go now. For some reason, the appearance of the guy who was a bit far from us was making him feel uneasy too. We decided to just leave and come back at a later time. About a week later, he and I went on another walk. We decided to take that back road again. He needed to take some more pictures. Same train was there, but that's not a big surprise. It would sit there for months at a time. We were going to try to go to the front of the train again and take those pictures of the front cars we didn't get last time. As we began walking in that direction, though, it happened again. A guy just came out of nowhere from between two of the cars. It could have been the exact same one from the first time. Once again, there was something very creepy feeling about the whole thing. My friend and I decided to just leave again. We talked about it for a while and came to a simple conclusion. There must have been some homeless people sleeping in those cars or something. We figured for that reason he must have been living in between them maybe. Perhaps he just didn't want anyone snooping around his living area. We decided that maybe we'd just stop bothering him and stop trying to get those pictures. We kept away from that train area for quite a while. My friend was really stubborn though, and really wanted those pictures of that train. After a period of time, we decided it had probably been long enough, and we wanted to go back. My friend was taking pictures, going further down the track than we had before. Since the man hadn't come out yet, we figured he'd moved on since then. My friend started going between the cars to get pictures that he needed. This happened so quick that it took me by complete surprise. The man just suddenly pounced out from behind one of the cars, screaming all sorts of gibberish. He was holding what looked like a knife in his hand, and he began to sprint towards my buddy. My friend was closer to the man than I was. He fell over in surprise. The crazy man easily jumped on him and held him down. My friend was struggling to get up. I hate to admit, but I almost ran away in fear. I knew I had to help my friend somehow, though. I ran over there and tried my best to pull this guy off of him. The man was a lot stronger than I'd thought, though. With the combined strength of me and my buddy, we were just barely able to push him off. The guy stumbled backwards and fell down. I tried my best to heave my friend to his feet. By the time he was up, the crazy man was up too. This was the first time I got a look at him. His eyes were chilling to me. They made Norman Bates look normal. His face was covered in blood. It was only then that I realized he'd actually bitten my friend. It was too much. The two of us took off running. The man chased after us with his knife, but fortunately only as far as the end of the train. We were able to get out of there safely from that point on. My friend had been bitten so bad he had to go to the hospital. The police went and arrested the man who attacked us. They found tons of dead animals in the area where he'd been hiding. It looked like he'd been eating some of them. He went to jail for the attack. 3 years for aggravated assault. The two of us, though, were stuck with the memory. When I was around 15 or so, my mom and stepfather got divorced in a pretty dramatic way. The whole household was turned upside down, and everyone's routines were thrown off. Mom was out doing something most nights after work. My little sister spent more time with her friends, and I became something of a night owl, usually waiting until the wee morning hours to lie down. Our house was a simple one in a rural area. 2 stories with a huge backyard sharing a fence with both a cow pasture and the entrance to these really thick woods. The house had a lot of problems, but I enjoyed taking over the maintenance and gardening work. They gave me something to do when I was feeling depressed at the time. For some perspective, our kitchen windows looked out directly to the fence described above. The left half of it bordered one of the black corners of the big cow pasture, while the right half bordered the entrance to the woods. It had a rather overgrown trailhead on that side, just barely visible from the kitchen window. For the most part though, all you could really see was overgrown grass and shrubbery, at least 4 or 5 feet high. Perhaps some low-hanging trees of mixed oak and cedar variety. This backdrop added a sort of eerie tranquility to our property, which I appreciated from the very first day we moved in. One night I took a break from my homework after realizing I'd stayed up way too late on a Thursday night, even for my standards. I went downstairs to make some food, and my dog followed behind me like she always did. There I was making a grilled cheese in the kitchen. While I was at the sink cleaning out the pan for the next batch, I noticed some of the grass from the wood line start to shuffle around. Now that really startled me at first, but as soon as I began to fixate on it, I saw no more disturbance. We lived in wildlife country at the time, so I figured it was probably a deer, coyote, or a cougar. Unsurprising for the latter, given the farmer who owned the pasture had dozens of cows, and sometimes did not bring them in at night. Strangely enough though, I began to notice this even more often in the nights following. Always whenever I was doing dishes after eating, I would look out the window, only to see grass shuffling around, then see nothing further as I fixated on the spot. I was always a fan of scary movies, and I tended to be a jumpy kid already. Each time I did my best to convince myself I wasn't really seeing any sort of pattern. This changed though, when my dog would start fixating on the woods too, and barking at night. Furthermore, our motion sensor security light began to stay activated sometimes, for hours on end, only switching off when I would go to the kitchen to make my midnight snacks. Eventually, I told my mom all about this, and while she did initially seem concerned, she also pointed out that we did live behind the woods after all, so we should expect animals or occasional homeless squatters nearby our property. If I was really that concerned, I could always just call the police or animal control. I didn't really disagree myself, and for the most part gave the matter no further thought each night forward. One particular night though, I decided at 1 a.m. spontaneously to take a dip in our hot tub in the backyard. I changed and my dog and I went outside. I climbed into the tub, closed my eyes, and zoned out like usual. I was suddenly whipped out of my trance when I heard a loud crunch, followed by what sounded like someone falling over into some bushes. I stood up immediately and turned around. "Who's there?" No one replied. It was dead silent, and I had the creeps now. I quickly put on my robe and rushed inside. The very next day, I told my neighbor friend and at the time crush about this. She thought I was being ridiculous, but nonetheless agreed to go with me to check out that part of the woods to see if there was any evidence of anyone or anything hiding in that direction I'd heard the noise coming from. We stomped through the woods until we got to where we could see the back of my house. We checked under every shrub and blackberry bush, but found nothing. It was probably just a coyote or something, deciding whether or not you would make a good dinner, the neighborhood girl said, smirking. I playfully flipped her off and laughed, quietly relieved there was no creepy person stalking me the previous night. Well, of course, I was wrong about that, because that night as I was making my usual dinner, our security light came on once again. I raced to the back door to see what was up. This time though, I could barely make out a shadowy 6-foot figure disappearing through the trailhead and into the brush to the right of it. My heart skipped a beat, and my dog, probably sensing my nerves, began to growl furiously. I called out into the night, "Who the fuck's out there? Come out right now!" Of course, there was nothing but silence. After sitting in the dining room for an hour, I figured I must be being paranoid. Maybe I was seeing something subconsciously, afraid of being out in the dark. I called my neighbor back, and she surprisingly didn't call me crazy this time. She told me she would tell her dad about it in the morning. I never saw that sort of thing again, and my neighbor's dad just chalked it up to being a homeless person camping out in the woods. Very most a stalker from one of the houses around ours, something he explained wouldn't be surprising, as my sister was quite a looker. He thought it would make sense she would have a stalker, as if that was supposed to make me feel better or something. I suppose, though, in the end it did. Months passed by and I forgot about this fairly quickly. That is, until a local news bulletin came out about a sexual predator having been recently apprehended by local police. It was a report from a couple living a few houses down from us, filed about the wife being approached at night by a tall, gaunt man in the evening hours when she was watering her garden boxes. She said he'd suddenly appear from the woodwork, quietly as if trying to sneak up on her. When she noticed him, she demanded his name, but he darted back into the woods. She called the sheriff immediately, unlike me, and a half an hour or so later, the department combed through those woods and apprehended the man, who was hiding underneath a fallen tree nearby. All the report said was that the man claimed he had been living in the woods for months, surviving on snacks stolen from a nearby gas station, and would not give a reason for why he was out there. Supposedly, he was wanted for numerous sexual offenses on minors and vulnerable adults some years prior, whatever those ended up being. Now, years later, I still get uncomfortable looking out into the woods at night, anywhere I may live. Who can blame me?